Hello, I am Maddie Dalrymple, the indie author, and I am here today with Troy Lambert. Hey, Troy, how are you doing?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. And I invited Troy to join me on this special patron and podcast guest only event to talk about Midjourney prompting and modification in Canva. And I'm thinking that because it's a beautiful sunny Sunday afternoon, um, this may be why it's just me and Troy, but we're going to be sharing this out. Obviously, if you're watching this, it means that you've found it on YouTube. And so I had asked Troy to join me for this because I saw some great images posting. And Troy, I think we talked a little bit about some of the things that I've been trying to do in Midjourney that I haven't quite figured out. So I'm really just going to kind of turn it over to you. Feel free to share with us how you're using Midjourney, and I'll jump in with questions as we go.
Okay, perfect. Well, first, I'm going to qualify this by saying I am not a graphic designer by trade or by nature necessarily. Like, I know what good things look like, but I don't know. Like, if you ask me to draw something, that's not my forte. So for me, when Midjourney and these things come along, it's actually extremely valuable because it allows me to create images by using text, which is what I am good at, is writing things. So it's kind of a nice blend. And for authors, what it enables you to do is, even if you don't create something you use for a book cover or whatever, you can deliver a more developed concept of something that you're looking for. Now, the other thing that I'll say is that Midjourney is not always perfect. So if you're looking, you need to look closely at the image, first of all. And if you're looking for something very specific, you may or may not get exactly what you're after. I'm going to show some prompts and ways you can kind of manipulate things, but at the same time, sometimes somebody posted a thing where they asked for a baby peacock, and basically what Midjourney created was a tiny little peacock, not actually what a baby peacock looks like. A baby peacock doesn't have all the colored feathers; it's this tan little thing, and it was really interesting because it's not necessarily accurate. The other thing is that Midjourney is so certain things, if there are images out there that are bad, it will imitate those images. So if you're searching on Google Images and you go, I can't find anything that is like this, so I'm going to go into Midjourney and have it create it. It's going to create something very like those really bad images you were seeing on Google Images, which I experimented around with and found out the hard way. I was like, why is it having so much trouble with this? And I went and looked on Google Images and went, oh, that's why. It's because there are images out there that are not what I want at all, that are from this prompt. So I have to change my mind about what I'm doing. So anyway, so with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just share my screen because I'm going to show, I'm going to just share my desktop because it's going to be easier. And I'm going to just show you some things that I did. So I did this morning, literally in like probably 10 minutes. So obviously this is not a great cover, but what I did was I went into Canva and I found one of their pre-made cover templates. And I said, I don't like that image in the background, so I'm going to create my own.
Mhm.
So I went into Midjourney. Now I'm going to scroll back up so you can see the process that I went through, because I debated about how I was going to do this. So I just came up with an easy prompt of a sword wedged in a stone in front of a lake. And I put photo real because I tend to like more real images rather than cartoonish or painty images that sometimes it comes up with. Now, and so it came up with 4 pretty decent images. And so I'll click on those and you can see them a little better. And we could view them in my browser or whatever, but I was like, I'm not sure about those. So I'm going to try something else. So I'm going to try it in the style of an oil painting. Now, what was interesting about this is I did not change the prompt at all to ask for a guy to be in the picture. All I asked for was in the style of an oil painting. And so that's the other thing that you'll find that Midjourney does sometimes is it just adds elements in that you're like, I'm not sure that's what I'm really looking for, or that's really a real thing. But it came up with some interesting images. I'm not sure these are really what I would call oil painting like, except for this one down in the corner. So I was like, I wonder what would happen if I changed that. So there are some things you can do in Midjourney.
So can I
And
ask a quick question? If
yeah,
you if you explicitly did not want a person in the picture, what prompt would you put in to keep a person out of it? No person or Because
You
I
know
think
what?
one of the tricks with Midjourney is becoming proficient in the language that Midjourney will understand and execute as you want it to.
Well, here's the problem that I found with Midjourney with some things is that if you tell it you don't want something, sometimes it will put that thing in or
It's
something else. Like it
yeah,
doesn't understand the no.
yeah.
So sometimes the answer is just to try again. Um, and because often you're just not going, it's just not going to deliver on what you're looking for. Oh, there's one other thing I was going to mention about this prompt.
Hmm.
You'll notice that I have this AR 6:9 in here.
Hmm.
AR is aspect ratio. The reason I do that is I'm thinking, okay, if I want to pull this into Canva or into another program to use for a book cover, that is generally speaking the ratio of a book cover.
Hmm.
So that's going to give me an image that's approximately the right shape to put on a book cover. So when we talk about Canva in a minute, I'll talk to you about like resolution, like image resolution, because one of the biggest disadvantages of Canva over other programs is that you can get a high enough resolution photo for an ebook cover. But if you're going to expand that to print, you're going to run into issues. It's not going to be high resolution enough most of the time, even if you have Canva Pro. So anyway, we'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
Um, but so there's a number of things you can do down here underneath the different images that you create. The first row is upscale, and we're going to look at that in a minute. And what that means is I like this image, and they're numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. If you've never used Midjourney before, that's how they're numbered is 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can upscale them, or you can choose variations of them. Now, the variations that you're going to get depend largely upon your settings. And let's go down here so I can show you what that looks like, because this is kind of important. Because you set up your personal settings, um, and you can look at like how you want this to various different things to look. So I have stylize on very high. That's because I like, for most of my books, which are mysteries and thrillers, I like photoreal images that are very crisp and high. Okay. Um, and so I stylize them very high. I have mine in public mode, even though you'd have to really search probably to find mine, because of the way I have this set up. I have the remix mode, which allows me to, when I choose to remix an image, which I'll show you in a minute, then I get a the ability to change that at that time. Like I can make subtle variations at that time. Sometimes that works, sometimes not so much. Now, probably the reason I got a person in that image was because I have a high variation mode. And part of that is because if I want to put my character in a different setting, I want it to create a large variation of what the original image was. Okay. And I have fast mode on. I don't have turbo mode on. I don't have relax mode on. Relax mode just takes a little less power. But I have fast mode on, especially for this type of thing, because we don't want to wait for an hour for, this to reload.
And
So,
stylize, am I understanding correctly that stylize is connected with the resolution of the image? Stylize seems like a weird
well,
word.
no,
Sure, I'm understanding
if you
stylize.
want, this is the stylize is kind of like whatever style you give it, it's going to follow that very strictly. So
Okay.
if I go stylized medium and I do photo real, I might get some more drawn type images as opposed to photo real
Got it.
images.
Yeah, got it.
Or it might be a little less sharp and photo real. At least that's my understanding of it. Now, and so there could be variations on that as well. And I know people that they put it on stylized medium because they think, well, I end up with some really cool things. And that's probably fair.
Mhm.
That's probably fair. Now, raw mode is where it's really going to produce a high resolution, like a raw image. Those take a long time and they take up a lot of space. And really, for what most authors do, it's overkill. If you're creating other different kinds of art, which I don't even know what that would be necessarily, that might be something I would explore that, however. on your own if you want to do something like that. I don't go to that extent because I don't need to. Between the use of Canva and Photoshop, I have no need for, raw level images, and they just take up more room on my computer and it doesn't do me any good. So let me go back up here and say that. So first of all, you can choose variations of this. Now, before I chose any of these variations, I came down here and chose a variation of number 4. I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. It's kind of light. It might make it into something that would be an interesting book cover, for a book titled Sword. Now, when I came down here, I didn't really like any of those, to be honest with you. Now, you might, and the other thing you can do is if you're in Canva or if you're in Photoshop, you can manage the light and change the light and the appearance of these photos. So, because that's the other thing I would tell you from the start is just like text AI, almost anything from an image AI that you take, like you are unlikely to be able to take it out of the image AI, put it on a book cover, and like it exactly how it is. Like you're going to have to modify it more than likely to fit your style and your choice of style. Now, in this case, when I came down here, now I did variations up here of number 3 and number 4 because I really did not like how this came out. And so this is where I go through, and I didn't really make any changes on the prompt itself, but I just came down and I said, let's do a variation of these 2 things. And I go, this one, I actually kind of like, and I like this little kind of lakey thing in here. And I think this provides a good space for a book cover once I do some other things. Okay. So I bring it out and I'm like, oh, I actually like that. That's kind of a cool sword image. And I think it'd make kind of a cool book cover. But what I did was I then zoom out 2 times. Now, the reason I do that, and the reason I tell authors about that, is basically because that gives you room for text above and below. And it also can create some cool alternate images. So we can see if we look at this one where I zoomed out, that now it created this kind of space too. And I was like, that's kind of interesting, but not really what I was going for. This one creates kind of a reflection. This one's just weird. Like this is some of the things Midjourney comes up with, where the sword is suddenly very long and it's stuck in, I'm not sure what that is. I'm
The
not sure
solar
how
system?
that's,
I don't know.
yeah, I'm just not sure what Midjourney came up with there. So, and this is a part of the process of the AI is going, okay, this is not great. Right. So then I chose this one. And I said, okay, I like that number 4. I'm going to upscale that. And then I'm going to pull that in and make it into a book cover. Okay.
So
Now,
I just wanted to jump in with a couple of things. One is that I think that the actual prompting you're using, like a sword wedged in a stone in front of a lake photo reel, like I think that it's helpful for me to see what text people are putting in, because when I first started using Midjourney, I was thinking of it as like if you're doing a Google search, like I was trying to pare it down as much as possible. And it took me a while to realize that paring down is not the idea. Like if you watch at people who are professionally doing this prompting, and spending tons of time on it, some of their prompts are really long. And so you don't get credit for keeping your prompt short. And the other thing I just wanted to add is that I found that the more imaginative it is, the better a job Midjourney can do with it. And the more specific it is, the worse job it does with it. And so the example
yes.
I had experimented with is I have a novella called Killbox Checkmate, and I wanted to have a chessboard with a rook, a queen, and a king on it. The rook and the queen of one color and the king of the other color. And not only could I never get it to do that, but I couldn't even get it to render a chessboard, because I think what Midjourney says is, I kind of know what a chessboard is, but you could get a chessboard anywhere. So I'm going to do a weird new chessboard where like it's herringbone patterned or something. And I never got to the point where I could convince it to say, no, just show me a normal chessboard. Like it wants to be imaginative, talking about it like a person. It's not good at specificity.
No, it's not. And I mean, I have an example of that. So like some of the other, so like this one, part of the reason I kept it short was I wanted just to see what Midjourney came up with.
Yeah.
If I had a specific vision in mind, I would have been much more specific, but I also would have had to be careful about that because in this case, a sword wedged in a stone in front of a lake, photoreal can give me almost anything. And we saw that, like when I change it to oil painting instead, now I get a guy in front of the lake too that I
Yeah.
didn't really ask for,
Yeah.
But like if I go back up here, and let me go back up here to one of the ones I was creating for a friend of mine that has a book where she has a couple, right? But it's a lesbian couple, so it's female, female, that's sitting in a coffee shop talking. So here is my prompt: a smiling white woman in her 30s, medium build, green eyes, russet brown hair, cut in a short bob, sitting in a coffee shop holding hands with a smiling Latinx heritage woman in her 30s with medium length dark hair and hazel eyes, photo real. The first two photos have no other female in them. The bottom two have a male
Yeah.
in them instead. Basically, Midjourney said, nah, that's not what I'm going to create. And several different attempts produced on her end to produce several different things that were not the image that we're looking for.
Mhm.
So if you're trying to get like a specific person or a specific image, you're probably going to struggle with that. You can put
Yeah.
in a Viking with a long gray beard, some stuff like that, and put in a long thing, but it's probably not going to come out with exactly what you had in your mind. And also with people, the more people you add to a photo, if you say a crowd and then you start describing individual members of the crowd, you're almost never going to get that.
Yeah.
Like if you describe a group of 4 people that you want to see, you're not going to get that 4 people. If you describe a diverse group of 4 people, you're going to get a diverse group of 4 people, but not necessarily exactly what you're looking for.
Yeah.
So in that case, you have to go, and some cases, like you'll say, let's just do one. And we'll just do a night in gold. I don't know.
Now, is there a reason that you're adding commas there?
So the commas tell it separates it, and the most important thing is the first thing that you put in.
Okay.
And then comma tells it this is a different thing. So photo read, photo real. So it tells it this is an instruction. Photo real
Mhm.
is an instruction. And then the double dashes tell it that this is a setting, a setting type thing that you
Okay.
want it to pay attention to. Um, and you can change, we can talk about, but you can change this aspect ratio based on what you're doing. Because one thing that Midjourney is really good at, I'll just hit the button while we're talking about that.
Mhm.
One thing Midjourney is really good at is social media images and things like that, but you need to tell it which aspect ratio. Otherwise, it's going to just create an image, and that might be a 1:1, and you're looking for uh, let's say a 16:9 or something like that to put as a header on your YouTube video, or something that you can then crop down to fit into a Facebook post or something along
Mhm.
that line. So the aspect ratio is actually, it's kind of a secondary thing people often don't think about, but it is something you should think about based on what are you trying to do with this? Like,
Yeah.
what are you going to use this image for? So that's
Yeah, I
part
had
of
a
it.
couple of thoughts on that as this is painting. Um, One is that I had a lot of fun creating a social media image for an Ann Kinnear book, and I, in general, have steered away from showing my protagonists pictures of them. But I was playing around with a scene from Ann Kinnear 6, and it came up with this great image. Woman in a red parka standing on a beach in winter. And it looked a lot like I imagined Ann Kinnear to look. So I thought, oh, this is so much fun. I'm going to include it. And then I ended up, I think it was coming up with square images, and I wanted to use it as my Facebook header. So I used Dolly out painting or whatever that's called to extend it.
Hmm.
Um, but one thing that was frustrating to me about that is I had this one image that in my mind looked very much like Ann Kinnear. And if I wanted to use that again, I don't know how I would tell Midjourney, and this is something that kind of initially was our impetus for having the conversation. If you have a character and you want to feature them in a series of social media posts, then how do you ever get Midjourney to go back and render that
It's
same person? Now I want her to be in the woods. Now I want her to be in a creepy old house.
well, so essentially what you want to do in that particular case is there's a couple different ways you can do it. First of all, you can come up here and do the high variation mode and then use a photo prompt, like actually save that photo and use that as a photo prompt. Or you can repeat the prompt, and if you're doing them close together, often Midjourney will repeat that character because it'll recognize that's that same prompt and will repeat that character in a different setting if you include the setting. The problem is sometimes it doesn't. So it'll create 4 images, and one of them you'll say that's recognizable as my character, and the other 3 are not. And so you have to go, okay, I'll upscale that one and then vary that one. And so it takes a long time. Actually, I'll show you something like that I did in just a
Okay.
minute. And it's really challenging. Now, here's the thing. Like when we
That's
look
very
at this
weird.
dragon, we're gonna have to work on this, right? Because I
Yeah.
said dragon spitting fire. The fire in this case is way down here, and the dragon has a tiny little spark.
Mhm.
In this case, it's a huge dragon with a tiny little tiny little flame. This one, the flame is below the dragon's mouth, so it must think that the knight is the one spitting the fire.
Yeah.
And this, nobody's really spitting fire. So you can see that when you start to add different prompts, you're going to get at times, and I said a knight in golden armor, and none of this armor is really golden,
Yep.
right? So it's not basically what's happening, I believe, in the background is that Midjourney is not finding the images it needs to pull this together and to create it
Mhm.
because the prompts that I'm giving it is something that it does not understand. So I'm going to have to go, okay, well, let me copy this again, but let me change it. And I'm going to go,
I think that the thing that is going to really make Midjourney and similar things take off is if you were able to say, um, version 4, except make the dragon smaller, add gold armor, and oh, by the way, also make the knight a redhead, or make the knight bigger in comparison to the dragon, but keep the dragon as it looks in version whatever. Like, what I find frustrating is that there'll be part of an image that I like, a part of an image that I don't like, and it's just kind of random, as you, create variations. You don't have much
for,
control over it. To
for
me, it's more
sure.
like a brainstorming kind of thing than it is a practical.
Yeah, it's better to create a better idea of a cover that you're probably going to hand over to a cover designer, especially if you're doing a series,
Yeah,
unless you're creating a standalone,
yeah,
because it's going to be challenging to get the same images again. Now, unless you can create a series of images. Now, where it is really helpful is if you're creating character profiles and you want a character that's of a certain description, right?
yeah,
Well, then I'm not worried about the book cover aspect. It doesn't have to be the right aspect ratio. It doesn't have to be anything like that. It just has to be an image that brings to mind this character for me, right? So it doesn't have to be exact even. But if you're going to use those and other things to share on your social media, to put character profiles on your website, stuff like that, it's going to take some more work on your part.
mhm,
Again, it's not going to be something you can just use, straight away. And like,
yeah,
again, when we look at these, none of these images are going to satisfy what I want,
yeah.
right? The dragon, I said a fire breathing dragon instead of spitting fire, and it's still not accurate. And although
Also,
now the knight is kind of in armor, eh, not, not real great. This image is not even there unless the dragon
yeah.
ate him.
And
I
the
don't know.
dragon, like, what it's portraying as the dragon is not what I think of as a canonical dragon, which could be
Right.
good, but if what you want is more like the image that pops into to more people's heads when they think dragon, um, I don't even know what I would call this thing, but, uh, do you have tips, like, if you're just unhappy with the way Midjourney is thinking about the dragon, could you say, like a dragon that's about twice as tall as as the knight and doesn't have scales, or like, can you refine what it's coming up with when it's thinking of dragon?
We can try. Now, let's see. I don't know if
A
you even
traditional,
want to
what if you
try.
put like a traditional looking dragon or something like that? This is why I think that this whole prompting thing is so fascinating, and that there are going to be people, I mean, there already are clearly people who have this as a specialty. Like they're just Midjourney jockeys and know exactly what to plug in to make it cooperate as much
Yeah,
as possible.
well, yeah, and it's also like it varies so much by genre that normally I wouldn't be trying to draw dragons, right? It's
Yeah.
just not really my um thing. But
Yeah.
let's see how bad we mess it up. We just add some details.
Uh-huh.
And I'm not even gonna add the aspect ratio. I'm just gonna let it do its thing and see what happens.
Okay.
But yeah, it's interesting to like try these different things of going, okay. And there are people that have, and there's like advice on different prompts, right? I actually took a course from Nick Stevens and his crew on AI cover creation for authors, and there's all kinds of prompt ideas, right?
Oh,
And
cool.
I'm like, okay, those are cool. Those are cool. Oh, I know
This is
exactly what's
really
happening
weird.
now. We're actually making a dragon who is in armor.
Yeah. Yeah. So while
Yeah.
it's drawing this bizarre dragon, I do feel required to throw out a caution about using AI generated covers. So this is so in flux that anything we say today, the beginning of August 2023, is no doubt going to be very different in a month or two. And just because everything is so much in flux, my advice to people is to use AI generated art for things like social media posts, but not for covers. And
Yep.
also because you're risking creating a cover that is not copyrighted, so somebody else could say, "Oh, that is a really cool cover. I'm going to use it on my book too." But if you took this class, is there anything that you can share from what you learned there about the pros and cons of relying on AI for book cover design?
Well, what I would say is, and I was going to mention that too, is first of all, there's so much in flux as far as legally about
Yeah.
what's happening with Midjourney. It's not near as bad with text generation yet, because the reason is the AI text generation is not, in my mind, creating usable material at this point.
Hmm.
It's creating an outline. It's creating maybe a basis you can base something on. But if you took that text, edited it slightly, and published it, you would have a really, really crappy book,
Yeah.
because it's just not, that's not what it's able to do and designed to do. Right.
Yeah.
And so most of us that are authors, we understand that. So by the time we would take an AI text generation thing and make it into a book, we would have heavily modified it. Well, I'm telling you from the experimentation that we're doing right here, that I would not take any one of these images, even the one that I took and put in Canva, and put it in there and place it on a book and publish that book and say, here's my book with my book cover,
Hmm.
because it requires heavy modification, because none of this is exactly what I would want.
Hmm.
Right. And so either I need an artist or I need to apply skills of my own and edit and modify this heavily. And then it's no longer an AI image that I'm just taking and putting on a cover.
Hmm.
So that's where I would tell you the caveat comes in. If you are just working to generate and refine an AI image, then going, that's it. That's my book cover. Like, for example, so we'll just look at it right now, like this
Hmm.
one. Yeah, I took that image and I put it here, and I just used the text that they had and changed the color. I don't like this text because I don't like how it blends into the background. I'd have to do something else with the colors and things like that to make it pop out.
Hmm.
I would not leave this text in the same font as what
Hmm.
this text is in, right? So by the time I got done with this, and I would probably, because I don't necessarily like this color match for a fantasy, for this type of a fantasy novel.
Hmm.
So I would probably change that too. I would change the color palette slightly. I might even crop this image. I might even flip it. I might change the background a little bit.
Hmm.
By the time I do all that, this is no longer the image that Midjourney created. This is a shadow of the image that Midjourney created that I have now taken and done something else with.
Yeah.
So in my mind, if you're going to use this for book covers or anything else, you're going to have to take it and modify it. Now let me go back to Midjourney really quick and this weird looking, so you can see you get this weird looking dragon. It's like, so I'm going to have to go in and revise that prompt and probably put in some commas because it's probably thinking I wanted a dragon that's in armor. And
Yep.
that is not at all what I wanted.
Yeah.
But like, so let me scroll up into mine and see that I have created some character images. Now these character images are really good. And like this
Mhm.
one, like I actually have some variations. Like this one is kind of the same as one of the ones I had above. You know, some of the other ones are very, very different. Um, but you know, like I want to have this character in a different setting. So I can attempt to make a different setting,
Mhm.
right? Or I can zoom out. But the thing that I often do is I take this into now to do this in Canva, you're going to need Canva Pro, and which I do not have because I have Photoshop.
Mhm.
And I'm fairly proficient with Photoshop, and that was an accidentally obtained proficiency. Um, but Photoshop is very expensive. But this is what I tell authors all the time. So Photoshop is a monthly thing, right? You can pay monthly if you want to. And so is Midjourney. So you don't need to have these all the time because probably you're not creating, unless you're a very prolific author, you're not creating covers and creating character profiles and all that stuff all the time,
Mhm.
right? You're doing that 1 month and then you're editing and writing and doing all this other stuff. And then you come back 4 months later to do that. So don't pay for this every month if you're not using it. Pay for Midjourney and Photoshop for 1 month when you're creating covers and character profiles and stuff. Create them and then cancel. And then 4 months later, when you need it again, re-up it again. Unless
Yep.
you're a designer. If you're a designer or you're very prolific and you're constantly designing stuff, different story, right? But you don't have to do this all the time.
Mhm.
And in fact, I don't recommend that you do because you can see that if we scroll up to these different images I created of these characters, this took a long time, right? This took
Mhm.
a really long time to find all the correct images that I wanted. And and this is actually a good example. So this is a for a print book cover, sort of. Now it didn't turn out. The problem is, like, I still have to take this into Photoshop and change it because it's got this really weird thing of like there's two of these towers that are
Yeah. Yeah.
identical
Yeah.
in the same city, you know, stuff like that. Not going to work, right? And also, even if I try to make this a book cover, these two are not enough over to this side, and they're too big to make this into an actual book cover.
Yep.
But what I did was I changed the resolution. I zoomed out of some other images, right? And I had it created a larger background,
Yep.
right? But anyway, so that was just kind of playing around with those things. But you can see, like, you can create some characters and go, okay, I like that character profile for this guy best. Now, getting him in different situations is tricky. And since
Mhm.
he was a minor character in this book, I'm not doing that, right? I'm not
Mhm.
going to bother doing that. But this all takes hours. Now, you as a writer, what's your best time spent?
Yeah.
Writing.
Writing.
Writing, right?
Yeah.
So I would recommend that you not have Midjourney all the time because here's what can happen. You create this minor character. Like I created this minor character. I went, you know what? I wonder what he would look like in Midjourney. I mean, I could have been working on writing that book
Yeah.
instead of going, hey, man, that's a pretty handsome dude. That's a good one. You know, so,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's, if you're in the character development process, which really when I did this, but I'm deliberately like I leave most of the time my Midjourney is closed. My Discord is closed and my Midjourney is closed. Like it's not even on my desktop down here.
Mhm.
And the reason is I'm tempted. I'm just like everybody else. I'm tempted. Like all
Yeah.
these novels, then it doesn't matter. I'm still tempted to go in here. Like I'm still tempted to go, I'm not even writing a book about a dragon, but I want to get this dragon right.
Yeah.
So I'm going
Yeah.
to
It
put
can
in,
be a time suck.
you can put all these prompts in, right? And it can be addictive and can be a time suck. So I would tell you, once you get something that you're fairly happy with, then probably stop. Now, if you're going to use this to create covers, you're going to need things like, so I'm just going to go to Canva and say, first of all, so like I started with a template style, right? Because it already had the type of font that I would typically use for a fantasy.
Mhm.
Now, I might leave this font for the title. I'm not going to leave it for the author name. I'm actually going to change it. Um, and I'm actually not because I'm not going to ever write this book. And so I'm not going to actually create this cover. Right.
Uh,
But normally I would change that font. all that kind of stuff. I've messed around with this until this was what I wanted, because I probably would not use this as a book cover, even if I was writing a book about a sword,
Mhm.
because it's not quite there yet.
Yeah.
So you're going to want it. So this is the issue is you're going to have two factors. First, you're going to come into Discord and you're going to go, oh, I created this image and now I want to go, okay, well, now I kind of want to write a story about a dragon in armor. So I'm going to, let's say I'll upscale image 3 because he's kind of a man-like dragon. I don't know,
Uh-huh.
maybe he's a crossbreed or something. So I'm going to upscale. Oh, he's smiling even. This is a good humor book. So I'm going to go, well, I don't even know what I'm doing now. So I'm going to just zoom out 2 times because I want this to zoom out to the point where I can actually have some room for text, right,
Yeah,
with
I
this
didn't know
dragon.
about the zoom out thing. The zoom
Um,
out is on its own worth the, price of admission for this.
oh, yes. Well, and the other thing, so let me show you this too, because this is new in one of the new versions, in the newest version, 5.2. And see, already I can go, well, now they're zooming out, but obviously behind him was this rock,
Mhm.
right? But when it zooms out, it doesn't always do what you wanted it to do. Like that's not necessarily
Yeah.
what I wanted it to do. Now this one's probably usable. This one might be usable, but like this, I don't know what that weird rock is or what the weird rock is here,
Yeah,
right?
kind of
Because
turned
it's
into a
it's
cloud or something.
yeah, and this one kind of turned into like I don't know what that is exactly. This one almost looks like something else in armor.
Yeah.
It's really strange.
Well,
But
and I
anyway,
think that that's
yeah.
another good example of why using this using this for anything other than more casual uses like for social media is tricky because I think that there's a temptation to accommodate the things that you can't change by
Yeah.
changing your creative vision. So if you've been working on this and the best you can get is the dragon guy with the cloudy looking thing behind him, then I feel like there's this temptation to go, okay, well, I guess I could work that into my story. And no, you don't want some fake
Yeah.
computer driving the direction of your story because you're trying to accommodate the fact that you don't have control over what it's
Or
showing.
here's the other thing is so I go, well, okay, I don't really like this number 2 the greatest, but I'm going to upscale it anyway. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it into Photoshop, remove the background. Now I'm going to put in a different background, right? Because I'm like,
Yeah,
I don't really like that background. So I'm going to take this out of the background. So I'm using another tool, spending more time in that tool to
yeah,
remove this. When by the time I do all that, I could have gone to my cover designer friend and said, hey, here's $500, make me a cover, right? And let them do this stuff.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
That's a
but
great
anyway,
point.
but the other thing that there is this very strong and very subtle, and I wanted to show you this because it does produce some interesting results. Now, this is that remix setting that I have.
Yep.
This allows me to come in and make changes on this. Now, probably on rocky ground is what's producing this rock in the background, more than likely. So I can go, I wonder what happened if I deleted that. I'm just gonna I don't know what's going to happen, honestly.
Mhm.
But I've also added a strong variation. So I want a strong variation of this, not a subtle one. That you'll see in a minute when I do a subtle one, how it actually tries to stay fairly true to the original image, and which doesn't always work either. But this is, like I say, this is very hit or miss. This is where you're going to come in here and go, some days it's going to be good and you're going to go, oh man, that is a great cover. I was able to take one image that I got out of Midjourney, modify it slightly, and actually make it into a pretty decent book cover. I was pretty happy with it. That is not the norm. The norm is now, because now we're getting a dragon that has a goat face of some sort, maybe. I don't know. Um,
Yeah, it's like a
not
llama. No, it's a llama.
that's not a traditional looking. It reminds me of Tina from Napoleon Dynamite. Eat your food. Gosh. Anyway, um, but I mean, I don't even know. It's so weird. But
Yeah,
anyway, so when I did that strong variation and I took out the rocky ground, now I got a tree behind him or this kind of blurred background, which is actually kind of cool. But I that rock left. Okay.
yeah.
Now if I go very subtle, and this time I'm just going to leave it however it is, and I'm going to see what variations I get. So, but the issue is you're always getting variations.
Yep.
So for things like social media and stuff, you can create some really cool images. Oh my goodness, I don't even know what it's doing. That's going to be pretty crazy. Um, but anyway, so you can get some interesting images for social media and stuff like that. But you're not for creating book covers. There's additional work that's going to be required. Even the image that I got that I really liked, I had to pull it into Photoshop. I had to change the coloring. I had to change the background slightly. I had to play around with it. Then I have to add text. I have to be sure I'm adding text that has the correct fonts for that genre and that
Yep.
work well for that. And I would just tell you that that's really difficult to do. The other thing that I'll tell you is to avoid some of the issues, potential issues with copyright and stuff like that, some of the stuff that's happening with this. Let's just look at these really quick while we're talking because oh wow. Anyway, I'm not sure what any of that is, but to avoid those issues, like Adobe is one of the companies that said we're going to pay artists that we're training AI off of their work. So it is more expensive to go with Adobe or one of those other programs. But if you're looking at the ethical side of things, the potential ethical implications, paying the artist is one way to get around this issue that we have of these are this is work being taken from artists that are not being paid to
Yeah.
train this AI, right?
Yeah.
But you can also see that this AI, as much as we would like to say it's wonderful stuff, and it is, it's fun. Like this is a fun image. I would mess around and do something with that image potentially.
Yeah.
If I was going to write a funny story about a dragon, because hey, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
But as interesting as they are, they're not what we're after. So
Yeah.
your prompting is like prompt engineering is definitely a thing. If you want to become a prompt engineer, that is really cool. But if you don't, just play around with the different prompts and start looking at there's courses out there. There's all kinds of stuff out there that have resources. And actually the Nick Stevens course was not that expensive. And one of the things that comes with it is a resource that talks about that has basically a whole bunch of prompt examples
Yeah.
that'll help you to create better prompts for mystery novels, whatever the case may be.
Well, it would be interesting. I'm going to invite anyone who's listening to this video to add links to YouTube channels that they have found especially helpful for prompting. And it did make
For
me
sure.
think that I can imagine a useful use of Midjourney would be to go in and say, I want let's say a Facebook post aspect ratio that is like, let's say you've written um, a book that's set in the um, the time of Seurat. And you could go in and say, I'm just looking for a background for basically an ad. I'm going to get a image of the cover, or maybe you're using BookBrush to do some kind of 3D thing. But I want like a seaside in the style of Seurat. Now I want a garden path in the style of Seurat. Now I want a house on a hill in the style of Seurat. And it could be cool background images, I guess, unless Midjourney feels like it's never just going to do a background image. It's always going to want to put something in there to prove its
I
worth.
wonder, I have thought about this before. In fact, I did one with a lighthouse. But let me see if I can do it. A seaside. Uh, how do you spell Surat again?
Seurat.
Oh, whoops. Well, we'll see if Midjourney figures it out, or if
Yeah.
it's going to produce something that it feels like is like maybe a seaside in the style of sauerkraut or something. I don't know. We'll see what it comes up with. But that is the thing is it's with things like that, it's interesting to and I think that's where its real strength is in creating backgrounds or even creating an image up front that then you can remove the background and put a different background on it.
Mhm.
Again, it's still going to require work. It's you as the creator and as an artist and as all those things, you're going to still have to do something to, you know, but oh, that's
Have you ever successfully just made a background? Like, I don't want buildings, I don't want stuff. I basically like, I just want
well,
forest
the one I
path or
did,
something like that.
I wanted a lighthouse, but let's say dark. Let's see what it does because I'm interested in that because I thought about for one of the actual books that I'm working on is that I would like this one image in the background, and I haven't found. But I kept putting a silhouetted man in front of it, so I'm wondering what it comes up with because I might be able to. This might give me an in to create something along that line. And again, I would put in the aspect ratio, and I'd probably put in a little more details. I just want to see what it comes up with.
Yeah.
But maybe, I mean, it looks kind of
Yeah,
like
so
full of
far those
paints
look
here.
cool. And the nice thing about this is if you did pick an artist, maybe one that is part of Creative Commons or something like that, and so you could get a consistent look um, that's appropriate for your book. Because one of the problems I find with sites like Deposit Photo is I might find a really good city street, but then now I want to use as a background a country road, but I want it to be brand right. I want it to look consistent across the different posts, but there is no consistency in that kind of actual photograph or
Right,
illustrations done by
exactly.
different people. And so I can imagine this could be a good way of getting those kinds of backgrounds that look consistent across different subjects.
Right, exactly. I'm trying a different prompt just to see what happens if I tell it photo real because it was
Mhm.
very imaginative, actually.
Yeah,
So I'm like, I wonder if I tell it photo real and actually give it an aspect ratio. Because this is another thing that, like, you could create the image of your character, and then you could create the dark forest path, and then you could use Photoshop or Canva or whatever to layer the two and to create something, something that's actually more like taking the basic things that you get out of Midjourney and blending them. And I think that's a great idea. Or, using another program, using Dolly or whatever
yeah,
to basically create additional images that you can use to blend with what you get
yeah.
out of Midjourney.
I can
And so I mean,
imagine.
I think that's going to be a really key thing too. Again, I think it's a matter of you're still going to have to be creative. You're still going to have to be the artist. Like this is not Midjourney is not replacing an artist, just like, Chat GPT is not replacing writers.
Yeah,
It can make their work faster. But I mean, all those are kind of interesting. They're not really photo real, I wouldn't say. Oh,
no,
maybe. That one's kind of
sort
yeah.
of. They look more like
Yeah.
illustrations. But I do think that
Yeah.
I mean, this is just gonna get better and better in 3 months or whatever.
Hmm.
We're gonna be able to go into something like Midjourney and say, "Okay, I like the background, but Midjourney, whatever that thing is on the left, please make it look more like a rocky outcropping and less like a cactus or
Yeah,
whatever." And as that
exactly.
starts happening, then I think that the argument, I think there's gonna be that stage, um where what the humans still have is the ability to sort of assess the visual pleasingness of the image, but, I mean, people say, "Well, AI is never gonna be able to write a book." Well, I'm pretty sure that if you asked ChatGPT or something to write a Hallmark movie, I'm pretty sure it could do a pretty good job, and I think that as time goes on, that it's gonna become the tools are gonna become more and more sophisticated, and that telling the difference is gonna become more and more difficult, and I just think that that's a fact that artists kind of have to grapple with, that over
Well,
time, these things are gonna get better.
and here's what I've told like a lot of freelance SEO writers and stuff who are obviously very worried because SEO articles are very easy to write, which is one of the reasons that you do them as part of your freelance career is because I can knock out an SEO article in 30 minutes and get paid $150. But now the marketing agencies are going, well, I can give Chat GPT a prompt and it can knock out an SEO article in 3 minutes and I don't have to pay it
Yeah,
$150. So the key is going to be quality, right? I have no doubt that with predictive tech, I could probably, and once it gets better at long form, right now, AI is not good at long form things. It tends to wander off track, which makes it very much like writers anyway. So I don't know. I should kind of tend to wander off the path. But I think that like the predictive text, I could write a Hallmark movie, right? I could write a Hallmark movie, but it's going to be probably a mediocre Hallmark movie
yeah.
because I'm not going to have that imaginative side of things. I'm not going to have the twist. I'm not going to have something different that sets it apart. And in other news, Hallmark is considering adding a second plot this Christmas. So, um,
Well, that's just it. The more formulaic it is, it's like Is McDonald's ever going to give you the best burger you've ever had? No. Is there a comfort in knowing that you can go to a I went to the McDonald's in Beijing just because I was curious to see if it was exactly the same, and except for the ketchup, it's exactly the same. And,
Hmm.
there's a comfort to that, and I think that there's creative work as well. Like, people don't, I'm guessing, watch Hallmark movies because they're looking forward to a big twist at the end. It's like you watch it
No.
because you're looking for it's like comfort viewing. And the
Yeah.
more predictable it is, then the faster the machines are gonna be able to do it for you, the more twisty and complex it is. Like I just read Cloud Cuckoo Land. Is an AI ever gonna be able to write Cloud Cuckoo Land? Not for a couple
Nope.
of decades. So the more complex and the more unique it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Like we've looked at the failings of AI art, but at the same time, we've looked at some of the things that AI art has done here. I've gone, hey, that's actually pretty interesting.
Yeah,
And I know people, and I've been able to use AI art as a springboard to create something else,
yes,
the same as you can with a lot of other things. So right now, AI in my opinion, is a tool. It can be used for some things, other things it is not good for, just like
yep,
you wouldn't use a hammer to drive in a screw.
mhm,
Well, I hope you wouldn't. Anyway, not going to go there. But anyway, um, but you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
this is a tool that you can use for some things that you probably shouldn't use for others. And it, again, for artists, it's not a replacement. And I'm not saying it's a replacement. And also, I'm really interested to see the legal things that come out of what is happening around Midjourney and some of these other tools, because there are questions about how this was trained. And so you have to go, okay, if that person is due money for their work, it's important that they get paid.
yeah,
So anyway, that's
yeah.
just another road we can go down.
Well,
So
we've gone from, trying to make a dragon that didn't look like a llama to the moral imperatives of artificially intelligent generated art. So, um, Troy, were there any other specific things that you wanted to go over before we wrapped up?
no, I think this is just again, I mean, what you've seen is just playing with AI and understanding like what it can and can't do.
Yeah.
And I think that's just that'll be forever an interesting discussion, I think. So we could probably have this conversation again 3 months from now and it'd be totally different.
Yeah, I
But
think you're right.
as authors, just think about why you're doing something and what you're doing with AI and, use it as the tool that it is.
Great. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.